Lydia Hines, age 81, collapses onto her red couch, takes a deep breath, and lets out a defeated yell. She just returned home from what was supposed to be a 5 hour shift, wiping down appliances and helping customers at a Home Depot in Berlin, Connecticut. In the first 4 hours, she paused several times to catch her breath, so she clocked out an hour early. I feel trapped working, but I can't stop working, Lydia says, sitting up to cuddle her basset hound named Bridget. Lydia's husband, Bill, gives her a kiss, but lets her be. The 90-year-old would like to get a job to help Lydia pay the bills, but because of health problems, there's little he can do. I feel so guilty that I can't work, Bill says. You can't work because of your age and your health issues, Lydia snaps back. There's no sense feeling guilty about it. All right, folks, happy Wednesday evening. This article is by Business Insider, and the author is Noah Scheidlauer, and it was published this year on July 26, 2025. Now, I want you to imagine you have a spouse who is 90 years old, and you yourself are in your early 80s. There's a picture of her and her adorable basset hound. Okay. There's Lydia snuggling her basset hound. Um, Imagine you have to go to work. And while your 90-year-old husband would like to go to work, he can't go to work. We have to remember, so oftentimes people say, oh, I'm just going to keep working. And, I don't need to really save for retirement. I need to think about it because I'm happy to work. I need to have a reason to get up each day. That's all good and well. And you've heard me say many times, I intend to stay in education pretty much till my last breath. However, the work that I do in education, I can retire at 67, but I probably won't retire till 68 because that's my 30-year mark, okay, for a 30-year full pension. So I'm going to work on my terms after I retire. If I want to work, 2, 3 days a week, that's cool. Honestly, I probably won't work more than really 2, 3 days a week because I intend to have this YouTube channel in my retirement and we all going to be retiring together. Okay. So stay with me here. All right. Because this channel, I'm actually designing this channel to go into retirement with me. And people may say, but you don't retire, for 11 years. Okay. 10 years after this 11th year is up. Right. Well, that's true, but it takes a very long time to build a YouTube channel, establish an audience, create rapport and all of that. So, yeah, I want you to think about something. Those of you who want to retire with a little extra something in the pocketbook, okay, you want to do something that's not going to be physically taxing. She's having to be on her feet and work at Home Depot, not exactly a quiet, slow pace, sip your coffee and tea sort of job. Whereas I intend to be kicking back on my YouTube channel. And then if I want to work in a classroom as a sub or long term sub, whatever, I can do that too. But that's going to be by choice. And I can imagine the 90-year-old husband probably feels pretty bad. But folks, what can you do? And the scary part is what happens when one of them passes away, especially if she passes away first. And remember, this was just 2025, just a few months back, okay? This summer, in fact. A certificate for a regional award that Lydia received from Home Depot praised her dedication to the job sits on their coffee table. Since starting at Home Depot in 2022, she's received 2 promotions despite being unable to climb ladders or lift heavy objects because of her heart failure diagnosis last year. In a photo attached to the award, she's smiling from ear to ear. Now, the best Lydia can muster is a muted grin. I have to praise Home Depot here. All right. They're hiring someone that they really know can't do much of the job. Okay. And they're giving her promotions, even though if we really want to get technical, those are what I like to call honorary promotions. Okay. Really though, she can't really do the job beyond the basics. And good for Home Depot to hire the elderly and, have her doing busy work even. But I'm willing to bet, okay, at her age, this is hard work. And like they said, she had to go home early after a 4 or 5 hour shift. If Lydia stopped working and lost her $300 weekly pay after taxes, she and Bill fear they couldn't afford rent. A few weeks back, they had 44 cents in savings. They weren't sure what they would eat for dinner. 3 printed out job applications for remote customer service positions lie near her award. She doubts she'll get further than one interview, but each application is a glimmer of hope. What company would hire an 81-year-old? She asks. Hopefully, one of them, she says. A better paying, less intense job could give them the boost they've yearned for, especially as Lydia's weekly hours some weeks have been cut from 22 to just 17 hours. All right, so let's take a look here. All that work to receive $300 weekly pay after taxes, and they can't afford rent. I'm going to tell you, I think one of the, what is it? Most scary things is retiring, being at the mercy of a landlord. Now, I live in an HOA, and we all know HOAs have their own issues. But you can also be smart in how you go about getting an HOA. Stay away from water, stay away from floodplains, stay away from high rises, all of that stuff. You have to live somewhere. So there's always going to be a risk, whether you buy a house, whether it's in an HOA, okay, what is it, mobile home type trailer parks. You gotta live somewhere, and there's always a risk. However, one of the biggest risks, in my opinion, to hurting your budget is being a renter when you retire because you are literally at the whim of the market. My HOA has had a few $1,000s in assessments in the 5 years I've lived here. I averaged it out. It comes to about $50 a month over the 5 years that I've lived here in assessments. And I just take care of my walls. But it's wonderful because when a hurricane comes and all the trees and stuff are, leaves and all that stuff have to be picked up, we have maintenance people that do it. And I got this arrangement because, I have my knee disability and stuff, and I'm not going to be going out pushing lawnmowers and all that stuff. Okay. I physically can't do it. But being a renter is one of the hardest things, I believe, unless you are just filled with pockets of money where, they can raise the rent. What were they doing shortly after COVID? Raise the rent by, two, three, $600, and you can blink an eye at it. I would rather see them in a little inexpensive, like my condo here, two, 3 floor condos is what I live in. Okay. It's not higher than three. And some of the buildings are even two stories. Nothing fancy, simple neighborhood. It can be done. Oh, and then her job applications. What company would hire an 81-year-old? Yeah, it's pretty hard. And you have to remember also, folks, what companies are looking at. Yeah, I know people say it's age discrimination. Sure, it exists. Absolutely. But you also have to remember something else. Even if a company wants to hire you as an older person, and we are talking 80s, okay, I'm not talking your 40s and 50s, okay, I'm talking your 80s. If you're in your 50s, 60s, that might be age discrimination. But when we're talking 80, even if a company wants to hire them, the company has to be careful that the person that they're hiring is insurable because that can be an issue. Are you insurable? So depending upon the type of business, the type of insurance that they carry, it's kind of like also, how people commit, have felony records and stuff. And sometimes they get an employer that would hire them. But what happens when they go through the background check? Not that the employer wouldn't even hire the person with the felony. The insurance company says, no, you can't hire this employee. We will not insure you if you do. So then the insurance then the company has to tell the person with the felony, sorry, we can't hire you even though we wanted to. All right. There are plenty of people with felonies that are totally hireable, depending upon the type of felony you have. But the same thing can happen with old age. Okay. It's not that we can't necessarily hire an 80-year-old, but let's face it, you can't climb ladders. All right. You can't do heavy lifting and all of that stuff. We have a duty to take care of our elderly and make sure that they're not doing that heavy type of lifting work, which is why before you become elderly, it is so critically important that you save. A better paying, less intense job could give them the boost that they need. It could give Lydia the boost. Remember, her husband Bill can't do anything. Moving on down. Yes, I sometimes skip certain paragraphs. Okay. We do know that the 75 plus demographic is the fastest growing segment of the workforce. According to Carl Rozowski, Vice President of Financial Resilience at AARP, Americans age 75 and over are twice as likely to be in the workforce now as compared to in the 1990s. You've heard a lot of young people saying, we would have jobs, we would have more entry level jobs if the older people would leave. Well, the problem is if you're the older people, but you don't have enough saved for retirement, you can't afford to leave. Those in their 80s or older are part of the silent generation of Americans. They were born between 1928 to 1945. Lydia at 81 is 4 years younger than my dad. So my dad's also silent generation. Okay. And if you want to know where the silent generation term came from what I looked up, it was basically a generation where it was kind of like to be seen and not heard. That's why they're called the silent generation. That's from what I understand, if AI is correct. So this generation, Lydia's generation and my dad, okay, they grew up against the economic backdrop of the Great Depression and World War II, and they learned to be financially cautious. However, this generation, okay, not all the people in this generation, they didn't have access to the same kind of personal financial advice and tools that are prevalent today. Now then, Like I was saying, she is 4 years younger than my father. My father retired beautifully. Okay. Got the farm, got the whole thing going on. Okay. District pension and all that. You have people who are, Lydia is 4 years younger, and basically she has nothing. Something I learned in my 30s is and part of what I guess inspired me, motivated me, whatever, to figure out my retirement plan in my 30s. I had this awakening and I began to realize, you can look, and I know this is not rocket science. Okay. It's not something that, people don't already know, but sometimes as individuals, it becomes very aware to us. Like the term financial freedom has probably existed for years and years. I just didn't know of it. Okay. But it really dawned on me, you can have two people the same age and they're in totally different socioeconomic brackets. And not all because one was born into wealth and the other wasn't. It goes beyond that, but it goes to how they planned, what they did for, employment throughout the years, how they solved, problems, how they dealt with adversity. I'm not thinking just in terms of you were born rich and you were born poor, but the personal growth that we have inside of this, the desire to want to better ourselves, it's very, very individual. And one of the things that has always, I guess, kind of lit a fire under me is, I don't want to be this situation in this story. I want to be my dad who's well retired and comfortable and has what he needs. Okay. I don't want to be Lydia, who's only 4 years younger than my father. They're from the same generation, and Lydia has nothing. So that's always kind of been my impetus, I guess you could say, to really, really jump on a retirement plan and to stick to it. So there's Lydia and Bill. There's her husband, adorable couple. Okay. In recent months, more than 90 workers aged 80 and older told Business Insider in interviews how health challenges, loneliness, and increased cost of living all play in their decision to work at their age. And again, working at that age is fine if it's the choice that you want to work. And working at that age can be fine if the money you're making is just a little extra chump change. Okay. YouTube is an extra, little bit of extra chump change. All right. It's not what I am dependent on. Right now, the Hinzeys take in $4,600 a month from their Social Security, Bill's pension from a TV station in Connecticut, and Lydia's monthly wages. Monthly rent for their one-bedroom apartment in a 55-plus development is $1,400. Their car payment, $625. We will get back to that. Their car insurance, $236, and their Medicare combined is $426. On top of that, they have emergency medical expenses, medications, grocery and gas bills, utilities. They're left with close to nothing at the end of the month. All right. I'm going to play the Ramsey show here for a minute, okay? They take in $4,600 a month from their Social Security. Off on the offset, that sounds like, hey, that's pretty good. Let's remember though, it's between two people. I am slated to take that in just for myself. Okay. If I wait till 70 to retire, my projection is a little over $3,000. Okay. If I retire at 67, I start withdrawing, then the projection is about 2,700. I'm hoping I can wait till 70 to take it, but give or take. All right. This is between two people. So you're talking 2,300 a month. And that for me, the around three, like I said, if I retire at 67, I start withdrawing. That's about 2,700 a month, but it goes up quite a bit. If I wait a little longer. But even if I don't wait longer, then I've also got teacher's pension. Plus, I'll have I hope to have a few hundred thousand, a six-figure annuity, God willing. This YouTube channel, all of you with me, okay? So don't forget to subscribe. So they take in 4,600 a month. That's only $2,300 a person. Now, if they were calling into a show, I would tell them, dump the $625 a month car. What are 80-year-olds doing with a $625 a month car that they clearly can't afford? Look at the car. Let's take a look. $625 a month for their car, another $236 for their insurance. So you're talking you're talking almost $850 a month respectively just to their car. Now, I want you to think about this, okay? She earns $300 a week, so to speak, working at Home Depot. It's like they're paying for their car. I would almost put your thoughts in comments. I would almost tell them they'd be better off dumping the car, dumping the auto insurance, quit the job at a Home Depot, and just Uber when they need to go, or if there isn't senior care for medical rides and vans. Or here's another kicker: pay a neighbor, pay someone to drive you. A neighbor say, hey, can we spot you $10 to take us to the medical facility, whatever. Okay, I mean, in other words, it's almost like they're going forward and she's trying to work at Home Depot, but they're swimming backwards at the same time because they've got this ridiculous $850 a month per vehicle. Their vehicle, okay, let's go back here, okay? It's about $300 a week, she says she receives from Home Depot. That comes to respectively $1,200 a month. Approximately 800, more than 800. Let's just round to $900 is going to their freaking car. That's I do you see what I'm saying? That's leaving them $300. She's working to support her car. There is something wrong with that. And as you know, with senior articles and stuff, I am more gentle and kindly and softer because, like I said, these are my parents. Okay, this is my parents' generation, and I absolutely believe that should deserve some respect. There, okay. My tone is much different with TikTokers. Okay, so on top of that, they have all these medical. I would tell her dump the car and quit the job. It would almost even itself out. And I understand the car may be needed for other things, but again, there might be alternative ways for transportation. Lydia keeps thinking, what happened that we can't go out? I mean, go out and enjoy themselves, have dinner and stuff. Lydia says, but the rent's gone up and it's eaten up most of the Social Security money. We're in deep trouble. When I was a renter, before I bought this condo, okay, I got divorced 2013. I rented for the next 7 years, respectively, purchased the condo in 2020. When I was a renter, every single pay raise that I got at work through my school district job was eaten up by rent. If I got a $500 pay raise for the whole year at school, my rent went up $500. I didn't actually gain anything until I purchased a condo. And even though, like I said, we deal with HOAs, okay, but you know what? If I owned a house, I'd be dealing with having to repair the roof and gutters and down leaves and fences and all of that stuff. There's no free ride anywhere. The best decision we can make is what's going to work for us with our medical conditions and everything else. What fits us? So yeah, but being a renter, when I rented, every single pay raise, literally over 7 years, all got eaten up by the rent. Fortunately, I was able to stay afloat and keep ahead, but I should say stay equal, but I never got ahead. I didn't get financially ahead till I purchased a condo. Healthy enough to work in their 80s. Bill and Lydia say their financial mistakes were ones anyone could make. They never gambled, their investments weren't too risky, and they worked in decently paid jobs their entire careers. Still, some miscalculations, unavoidable health issues, and poor timing have put them in a wobbly financial situation. She says, every month when it's time for my Social Security check, I get really tense. I'm so afraid it's not going to come, she says. If we don't get that, we're out of here. We're on the streets. That means somewhere along the line, and they admit it here, okay? Their financial mistakes, okay? Somewhere along the line, they messed up. When you're sitting there completely reliant on your Social Security. I mean, I know we all are to some extent, but you have no other source of income. Like it's your Social Security and that is it. The number of cost burdened households, those that spend more than 30% of their income on housing expenses age 65 and older, has steadily risen since the 2000s. Absolutely, it has. Lydia says, I wish I had just saved $20 a week in my retirement account all those years. Even a small nest egg would relieve her stress. She has under $1,000 left in her 401k from Home Depot, down from nearly $10,000 at its peak, as she pulled money out twice for medical and day-to-day costs. Now, before we move on here, they're saying here, I wish I had just saved $20 a week in my retirement. One of the things that I've done to live so far beneath my means, this is why I purchased a really, really tiny condo. And here's kind of what was going on in my mind, okay? It's because I can't ever assume that I'm going to get married. I can't assume that, I'm going to partner up with anybody, much as I would like to, okay? But it may never happen. God help me if it does, okay? But I mean, I would like to. I would definitely like to get married again, okay? But here's the thing. I began to think to myself, what happens if I never did get married again? And one of the pieces of advice my grandmother gave to me is and I would remember in my 20s, she goes, what happens? She goes, if you're alone in your older years, She goes, "How are you gonna support yourself?" And of course, my grandmother was a retired teacher, okay? So she retired very nicely, okay? Again, not rich, but very nicely, absolutely no complaints. And so one of the things I did was I purchased a really small place because instead of purchasing something that was gonna take me the rest of my working years to pay off, okay, because I have 11 years respectively, I wanted something that I could pay off quickly that was really gonna be inexpensive so I could put additional money into retirement. It's the difference between would I rather put, so let's just say $150,000 into a nicer place to live, or would I rather put $150,000 into an annuity, which I really love. I love insurance annuities, okay? Or would I rather put it into a long-term annuity? Me, I'd rather put into an annuity. So it was really a matter of I can purchase a $100,000 condo, the one that I'm sitting in right now, and pay it off really fast, which I did in 3 years, and start, I save now about 30%, about 40% of my income now is saved into retirement. I've only recently started doing that, folks, so nothing to get side over. I've been doing that for, like, barely half a year, okay? It's recent. But I could do that and build, let's say, a $200,000 plus cash annuity. So that's what I chose to do. But in this case, she says she wished she had saved $20 a week in her retirement account. But we have to get something, guys. We can't totally kick ourselves because in some ways life just simply happens. And life brings us things that we didn't expect. But we must be absolutely, we have to do our due diligence to make sure that we are prepared also for life happening. And here, $1,000 left in our 401k from Home Depot, down from $10,000 at its peak. And $10,000 isn't a lot to begin with either. So, okay, let's see. In 2022, Bill and Lydia needed additional income. Remember, this article is just written this summer. During the pandemic, they'd suffered from health issues, including Bill breaking his leg, which kept them from working. They relied solely on Social Security and Bill's small pension of $335 a month from his time at the TV station. When they couldn't sustain their lifestyle, that's when Lydia took a job at Home Depot, and they hired her at $16 an hour at the age of 79. So she's been there for 2 years and she's now 81. Have you ever thought about that when you go to Home Depot or any store, and you see somebody who clearly looks like they should be retirement age? And we're not saying that, there's a difference between being at that job and, hey, you just like to be a Walmart greeter because you like to get out and say hi a couple times a week and all that, and you're all good on your retirement. But have you ever stopped to wonder how many people are there because they have to be there. They are flat broke. And perhaps when we get a little short sometimes because maybe they don't respond to us as fast or they don't move as fast, or how many times, okay? Let's just think about this. Have you been short with someone who is elderly? All right? We're all guilty of it, okay? Unfortunately, at this age I'm not like that, but I'm sure if we replay our life, conversations in reverse, all right? And you stop to think about them, about their private situation and why they're there. To it almost wants I want to give people a sense of empathy to not feel sorry for them, because I don't think they want that, but to be a little kinder, to be a little more gentle when you see someone who could easily be your grandmother, your great grandmother working there. To just, be, I think it's called, be cognizant of that, I guess, is what I'm saying. Lydia says when she started working at Home Depot, she loved it at first. She enjoys her customers, but she didn't know she had heart failure, which is why when people say, "Oh, I'm going to work for forever and ever," you don't know what you don't know what you have. When Lydia noticed tasks like sewing curtains and gardening knocked her out, a doctor found that her heart was not pumping correctly. At work each day, she's expected to clean appliances, keep the aisles tidy, help customers with their needs for $19.55 an hour. Again, maybe this article will help some of us be better people when we go to places and we are working with the elderly. Something I do is just a little game I do, okay? When I find myself, and we are all guilty of it, but I find myself getting a little, like, could you hurry up and walk across the street a little faster or whatever? Okay, we've all been there. And now I'm the one who has to walk across the street slowly. All right. But you know what? One of the things I do when I feel like, okay, I'm getting impatient, I stop and I say, this could be her. How do I want someone to treat her? This could be my father. This could be my little sister. In other words, for me, I take a moment, I breathe. I certainly don't become a Karen, and I go, okay, is this extra minute that it's going to take, and probably not even an extra minute, but is this extra 20 seconds really, really gonna, impact my life? And I always think to myself, okay, this could be my mother, in the front of the checkout line, who's still writing checks instead of swiping her debit card and letting me get through the line a little bit faster. In other words, we need to be more aware, more conscious. We need to have more empathy. And we need to, for me, I just think to myself, this could be my father. How would I want someone to treat him? How would I want someone to talk to him? And it always keeps me in check because we are, after all, human. Lydia says, when she got the echocardiogram, she said she joked with the doctors and told them, I forgot to tell you I'm pregnant. She said they got a big laugh out of that. As her condition worsened, she would have to catch her breath just from walking down an aisle. Conversations with customers and coworkers who call her Miss Lydia kept her ignited. She says she's thankful that Home Depot has given her time off with pay as part of her sick leave benefits to visit the doctors. Connecticut's paid family medical leave, she used that for 6 weeks because of her heart failure diagnosis. Home Depot didn't respond to a request for comment for this story. Lydia isn't alone in her battle between work and health. Similar circumstances have pushed many of those who are healthy enough to continue working. And let's stop for a minute. What is healthy enough? Is healthy enough, okay, well, I can breathe and get out of bed? Yeah, you may ache and pain all day, but what is healthy enough? The percentage of people who are working drops sharply starting around age 51 across all genders and education levels. Dozens of older Americans told Business Insider over the last year that they had no choice but to retire earlier after a diagnosis or injury. Most of us know someone who had to retire early. I know my mom retired, I think my late mom retired 5 years earlier than she really wanted to. But she had a teacher pension and she had 401ks and all of that. Many people rely solely on Social Security, which is about $2,000 monthly on average. Lydia's coworker, 80-year-old Tony says he works for similar reasons as her. He started part-time at Home Depot 2 decades ago in the gardening department before transitioning to a full-time kitchen and bath design consultant. He's not on his feet all day and says the work makes him feel youthful. He earns more than Lydia and works mostly for financial reasons, as taxes on his home and rising costs have burdened him and his wife. Remember what I was saying to you earlier? Whether you live in a home, what is it, a single standalone home, whether you live in a condo, a trailer, whatever, okay? There's going to be a price to pay to live there. What we have to do is we have to pick the best for us. And sometimes it's the best at that time. But I still believe that the worst situation of all is to be a renter at retirement. Again, unless you are really independently wealthy. Mentally and physically, Tony says he still feels good and it's a blessing that he's able to work. He's concerned that many older people will continue to be hurt by rising prices. I absolutely agree. Love keeps Lydia and her husband Bill going through financial ups and downs. One afternoon, Lydia searches every nook and cranny of the apartment in search of a CD by Bill's former jazz band. It's blue and yellow. I've looked everywhere, Lydia calls out, but I think I've lost the CD. Bill walks to a cabinet and pulls it out. She puts in the CD player and starts dancing, humming the melody to the first track. Bill looks on with a slight smile. He started playing piano when he was 3, performed with a swinging jazz band, and hosted an FM radio show in Austin. Most of those people are dead, Bill says. Well, you're not, Lydia quips. Bill and Lydia have lived in their current apartment for 6 of their nearly 30 years of marriage. This is Bill's second marriage and Lydia's third marriage, and each has children from previous spouses. Lydia lost much of her savings in her 40s when her second husband abruptly closed one of the successful office and mail service stores they started together. He declared bankruptcy very shortly thereafter. All right, I want to stop here for just a second. So they've lived in their apartment 6 of their nearly 30 years. All right, I see where there's a financial problem. It's Bill's second marriage and Lydia's third marriage. Between them, excuse me, they have 4 divorces between them. That gets really expensive. And it says here she lost much of her savings in her 40s. The mistake that I think she made was she didn't have a plan to rebuild it. At 38, I actually told myself that my 40th birthday present to myself was going to be a retirement plan. And I did it. All right. I told myself my 40th birthday, I have a retirement plan, active, going. Not I'm going to be, might be, Wannabe. No, I have an active retirement plan. I became a teacher at 38. Her mistake was that marriage, in her 40s, her husband closed one of the successful businesses. She never rebuilt it. And now why she didn't choose, and I'm not saying she had to rebuild that business, but she never worked to rebuild the finances, to rebuild the wealth. In other words, she didn't have a retirement plan. And again, maybe it was generational, generational knowledge, lack of knowledge. I don't know. There's that really cute basset hound of hers. It all went down the tubes, Lydia recalls, noting she was able to get a previous job back shortly after. I still don't know how I got through that. And again, remember, this is her third marriage. They didn't know each other at the time, but while Lydia was recovering from that financial setback, Bill was making 90,000 a year from performances and his work at the TV station. They met through a dating service in 1995. I was going on dates with 3 women at the time, he says, but when I saw her, I dropped them all. Like any marriage, theirs has its ups and downs. We put almost all of our money into that house, Lydia says. She says they bought it for $185,000 in 2002 and spent more than $100,000 on renovations. It looked a lot better, and we figured we'd flip it and do okay. Then the 2008 recession hit like a ton of bricks. Bingo. There it is. So one big financial mistake, Lydia losing her money in her 40s and never rebuilding it. And then, of course, they bought a house in 2002. Okay, that's fine, whatever, 185,000. That's very respectable in that time period. But 100 grand on renovations? Really? 100 grand. Then the recession hit. At the time, they had $75,000 invested in the market. But as the market fell, they pulled from their account to pay for their increased mortgage and property taxes. Because don't forget, $100 in renovations increases the cost of the house too. The couple hoped they'd get some money out of the home they'd renovated, but they defaulted on their mortgage in 2015, and a forced sale brought only $115,000. They filed for bankruptcy. The income from a side business Lydia had started to help people downsize their homes and the piano lessons that Bill gave weren't enough. They were among the more than 10 million Americans who lost their homes due to the Great Recession. I take a lot of responsibility. We've made mistakes, but also who knew a recession was coming? While Americans on average are saving close to the recommended 15% of their income for retirement, many in their 80s and 90s grew up before financial education and 401ks were prevalent. Not saving enough was a common regret among the 3,800 older Americans who shared with Business Insider their retirement story. For now, the Hinzeys are bracing for another life-shattering event. If I lose her, I don't know what I'm going to do, Bill says. She feels the same way. Remember I said to you earlier? What I say. If she passes away, is Bill possibly on the street? Is he possibly going to be forced to live in some state, senior care center where the care may or may not be very good, where you can sit in a wheelchair from sun up to sundown? God, take me before that ever happens to me. Please take me before that ever happens to me. I couldn't do it. I couldn't do it. Working to survive and holding on to each other. Some days after work, Lydia sits at her computer and applies for any job she could reasonably do. She tries to appear as sprightly as possible in her applications, sometimes emphasizing how she graduated from the University of Hartford mid-career in 1994. She leaves her age out of her resume. To counter her many rejections, she started building an online business selling gift cards, bags, and clothes. She hopes that little business will take off enough that she can work fewer hours at Home Depot. I'm telling you, ditch the car if you possibly can. There is little concrete data about the prevalence of potential ageism among workers in their 80s. I don't think we really need data. I think we pretty much know it's there. They're very, very frail to hire. Managers are already thinking that 60 is too old, and I'm 58. All right. Moving on here, Lydia and Bill hope to move out of their apartment before their rent rises again. It's increased by nearly $300 a month since they moved in 2019, and they have nowhere to go. They're waiting for an open cottage and a nearby care facility, which would cost a little over $1,600 a month for a one-bedroom unit, but they've rethought whether that would be feasible financially. I want to be in a place where if something happens, we're still together, or at least we can visit each other easily, Lydia says. With all the financial strain, some days Lydia wants to give up and say to heck with it. The couple attributes their longevity to their connection. We're soulmates, she says. This Business Insider article is titled 81 and working to survive. The author is Noah Scheidlauer, and it was printed July 26, 2025. The article follows Lydia and Bill Hines, a married couple of nearly 30 years who live in central Connecticut and say they are just scraping by. Lydia Hines, 81, collapses onto her red couch, takes a deep breath, and lets out a defeated yell. She just returned home from what was supposed to be a 5 hour shift, wiping down appliances and helping customers at a Home Depot in Connecticut. In the first 4 hours, she paused several times to catch her breath. So she clocked out an hour early. A certificate for a regional award that Lydia received from Home Depot, praising her dedication to the job, sits on their coffee table. Since starting in 2022, she's received 2 promotions, despite being unable to climb ladders or lift heavy objects because of her heart failure diagnosis last year. In a photo attached to the award, she's smiling from ear to ear. Now the best Lydia can muster is a muted grin. If she stopped working and lost her $300 weekly pay after taxes, she and Bill fear they couldn't afford rent. A few weeks back, they had 44 cents in savings. They weren't sure what they would eat for dinner. 3 printed out job applications for remote customer service positions lie near her award. She doubts she'll get further than one interview, but each application is a glimmer of hope. What company would hire an 81-year-old? Lydia asks. Hopefully, one of them. A better paying, less intense job could give them the boost they've yearned for, especially as Lydia's weekly hours some weeks have been cut from 22 hours to 17. Those in their 80s or older are part of the silent generation of Americans born between 1928 to 1945. They grew up against the economic backdrop of the Great Depression and World War II and learned to be financially cautious after seeing what their parents endured. However, they didn't have access to the same kind of personal finance advice and tools that are prevalent today. In recent months, more than 90 workers aged 80 and older told Business Insider in interviews how health challenges, loneliness, and increased cost of living all play into their decision to work at their age. Over a dozen say all they could find were minimum wage jobs, and many work despite medical diagnosis. The financial strain bleeds into their relationships with spouses and children and exacerbates a pervasive feeling of isolation. Right now, the Hinzeys take in $4,600 a month from their Social Security, Bill's pension from a TV station in Connecticut, and Lydia's monthly wages. Monthly rent for their one-bedroom apartment in a 55-plus development is $1,400. Their car payment is $625 a month. Their car insurance is $236 a month, and their Medicare combined is $426 a month. On top of that, they have emergency medical expenses, medications, grocery and gas bills, and utilities. They're left with close to nothing at the end of the month. I keep thinking, what happened that we can't go out? Lydia says of the couple's social life, but the rent's gone up and it's eaten up most of the Social Security money. We're in deep trouble, she says. Bill and Lydia say their financial mistakes were ones anyone could make. They never gambled, their investments weren't too risky, and they worked in decently paid jobs their entire careers. Still, some miscalculations, unavoidable health issues, and poor timing have put them in a wobbly financial situation. Every month when it's time for my Social Security check, I get really tense. I'm so afraid it's not going to come, Lydia says. If we don't get that, we're out of here. We're on the street. The number of cost burdened households, those that spend more than 30% of their income on housing expenses, age 65 and older, has steadily risen since the early 2000s. Research from the Joint Center for Housing Studies at Harvard University found that among adults age 75 and older who live alone in metro areas, only 13% could pay for assisted living without having to dig into their assets. I wish I had saved just $20 a week in my retirement account all those years, Lydia whispered during her shift. Even a small nest egg would relieve her stress. She has under $1,000 left in her 401k from Home Depot, down from nearly $10,000 at its peak as she pulled out money twice for medical and day-to-day costs. In 2022, Bill and Lydia needed additional income. During the pandemic, they'd both suffered from health issues, including Bill breaking his leg, which kept them from working. They relied solely on Social Security, Bill's small pension of $335 a month from his time at the local TV station in advertising sales, and some savings. But when they couldn't sustain their lifestyle anymore that year, Lydia drove down the road to the closest Home Depot and applied for a job. Home Depot hired her at $16 an hour in the electrical department. Lydia was 79 years old. I loved it at first, she says, and I still enjoy my customers. But when I started there, I didn't know I had heart failure. When Lydia noticed tasks like sewing curtains and gardening knocked her out, the doctor found that her heart was not pumping nearly enough blood. At work each day, she's expected to clean appliances, keep aisles tidy, and help customers with their needs for $19.55 an hour. Still, she keeps her sense of humor. When I got the echocardiogram, I joked with the doctors and told them, I forgot to tell you that I'm pregnant. They got a big laugh out of that. As her condition worsened, she would have to catch her breath just from walking down an aisle. Conversations with customers and coworkers who call her Miss Lydia keep her ignited. She says she's thankful that Home Depot has given her time off with pay as part of her sick leave benefits to go to doctor's appointments. She used Connecticut's paid family medical leave for 6 weeks because of her heart failure diagnosis. Home Depot didn't respond to a request for comment for this story. Lydia isn't alone in her battle between work and health. Similar circumstances have pushed many of those who are healthy enough to continue working. Others in her position may need the income but aren't physically able to work. Beth Truesdale, a research fellow, says a shocking number of people are pushed out of the labor force in their 50s and 60s, let alone their 70s and 80s. Dozens of older Americans told Business Insider over the last year that they had no choice but to retire earlier after a diagnosis or injury. Many rely solely on Social Security, which is about $2,000 a month on average. Lydia's coworker, Tony Spavardi, 80, works for a similar reason as her. He started part-time at Home Depot 2 decades ago in the gardening department before transitioning to a full-time kitchen and bath design consultant. He's not on his feet all day and says the work makes him feel youthful. He earns more than Lydia and works mostly for financial reasons, as taxes on his home and rising costs have burdened him and his wife. Mentally and physically, I feel really good, and that's a blessing, he says. Still, he's concerned that many older people will continue to be hurt by rising prices and economic uncertainty. People are suffering, and I don't want to put myself in that position. Love keeps them going through financial ups and downs. One afternoon, Lydia searches every nook and cranny of the apartment in search of a CD by Bill's former jazz ensemble. It was recorded in 1996. It's blue and yellow, and I've looked everywhere, she calls out to Bill. There's no way I lost it. He walks to a cabinet and pulls it out. She puts it into the CD player and starts dancing. He started playing the piano when he was 3, performing with a swing nightclub band. Most of those people are dead, Bill says of his old bandmates. Well, you're not, she quips. Bill and Lydia have lived in their current apartment for 6 of their nearly 30 years of marriage. This is Bill's second marriage and Lydia's third marriage, and each has children from previous spouses. Lydia lost much of her savings in her 40s when her second husband abruptly closed one of the successful office and mail service stores they started together. He declared bankruptcy very shortly after. It all went down the tubes, she recalls, noting she was able to get a previous job back shortly after. I still don't know how I got through that. They didn't know each other at the time, but while Lydia was recovering from that financial setback, Bill was making $90,000 a year from performances and his work at the TV station. Lydia met Bill through a dating service in 1995. He picked her up on their first date in a white limousine. I was going on dates with 3 women at the time, but when I saw her, I dropped them all, Bill says. He had glasses 3 times bigger than he needed, which I took care of, Lydia jokes. Like any marriage, theirs had its ups and downs. After a brief stint in Florida, they returned to Connecticut and spent most of their savings on a house that required more repairs than they had expected. Lydia had moved on from the now closed mail store and was working as a real estate agent, but says she rarely made enough money to be comfortable. Bill had left the TV station in 94 to focus on his band and was playing at weddings and teaching piano. They had been able to save a little throughout their career, but never enough to think they could retire. We put almost all of our money into that house, Lydia says. She says they bought it for $185,000 in 2002 and spent more than $100,000 on renovations. It looked a lot better. and we figured we'd flip it and do okay. Then the 2008 recession hit like a ton of bricks, Bill says. At the time, they had $75,000 invested in the market. But as the market fell, they pulled from their account to pay for their increased mortgage and property taxes. The couple hoped they'd get some money out of the home they'd renovated, but when they defaulted on the mortgage in 2015 and a forced sale brought only $115,000, they filed for bankruptcy. The income from a side business Lydia had started to help people downsize their homes and the piano lessons that Bill gave just weren't enough extra money. The couple was among the more than 10 million Americans who lost their homes due to the Great Recession. I take a lot of responsibility. We've made mistakes, but also who knew a recession was coming, Bill says. We all make mistakes, Lydia quips. Well, Americans on average are saving close to the recommended 15% of their income for retirement. Many in their 80s and 90s grew up before financial education and 401ks were prevalent. Not enough savings was a common regret among the over 3,800 older Americans who shared their story with Business Insider. Maura Porcelli, a senior director at the National Council on Aging, says she saw people who thought they had done their due diligence in planning for retirement, the sort who thought their monthly budgets were going to be sufficient, who had all those hopes dashed. For now, the Hinzeys are bracing for another life-shattering event. If I lose her, I don't know what I'm going to do, Bill says. She feels the same way. Some days after work, Lydia sits at her computer and applies for any job she could reasonably do. She tries to appear as sprightly as possible in her applications, sometimes emphasizing how she graduated from the University of Hartford mid-career in 1994. Though she admits her age from her resume, she suspects that employers have been able to tell, preventing her from landing anything higher than paying from Home Depot. To counter her many rejections, she started building an online business, selling funny gift cards, bags, and clothes. She hired a company to design her website, which cost a few $100s. She works with a print-on-demand company to secure merchandise. She hopes it will take off enough that she can work fewer hours at Home Depot. There is little concrete data about the prevalence of potential ageism among workers in the 80s. Companies are prohibited from age discrimination against workers 40 and older per the Age Discrimination in Employment Act. Managers are already thinking that 60 is too old, so there's little hope for someone who is much older, says Janine Vanderberg, who founded the anti-ageism nonprofit Changing the Narrative. Bill and Lydia hope to move out of their apartment before their rent rises again. It increased by nearly $300 a month since they've moved in 2019, but they have nowhere to go. They're waiting for an open cottage at a nearby care facility, which would cost $1,650 for a one-bedroom unit. But they've rethought whether that would be feasible financially. I want to be in a place where if something happens, we're still together, or at least we can visit each other easily, Lydia says. With all the financial strain, some days Lydia wants to give up and say, the heck with it. The couple attributes their longevity to their connection. They say they rarely fight, and when they do, it ends with laughs and comfort. We're soulmates, she says.